Andy, as bad as the board might be at Milan, compared to the board at Barcelona, well, that's a walk in the flipping park, isn't it? Dani Olmo has been in the headlines for a few weeks now because he was left in something of a limbo with regards to his registration as a footballer, which is causing difficulty for him in this second half of the season.
Well, this is the crux of the problem, really. They sign him from Leipzig for a fee that's going up to 60 million euros last summer. They can't immediately register him. And on one hand, there's alarm bells because you think, oh, this is bad. They've signed a guy for 60 million and they can't register him to play. And of course, they've been in this situation before. So you think, oh, they'll find a way through it. Barcelona, they'll find a palanca, a lever somewhere, and they'll figure it. And they did for that first part of the season, but through luck rather than judgment. The reason they couldn't register him is because they were already at the salary cap. Now, each team in La Liga has an individually defined salary cap depending on your income, your means, etc. So obviously, Barcelona's is a lot higher than Leganes, for example. But they're operating at the top of that. Now, the reason they were able to register Dani Olmo and Pau Victor, we mustn't forget about him because he is also a deregistered player, because Andreas Christensen had come back from injury. So with Christensen getting injured in the first part of the season, it was almost like you would get in American sports a disabled player exception, in that Christensen's salary basically disappears from the cap. So that and getting rid of Ilkay Gundogan created enough space for Dani Olmo to go into. Now Christensen's fit again. So they've got a problem. And it's, last in, first out sort of business. So they've been trying to find a way to create the space, but more immediately just register him, because there's a bit of a difficulty in that they needed to register him by the 31st of December to get him to play in the second half of the season. They were able to get an extension to the 3rd of January. Now, when they missed the 31st of December...
How did they miss that?
Well, they just didn't have the space to put him on. And of course, the transfer window hadn't opened, so they couldn't get rid of anyone. And obviously, Barcelona have had difficulty getting rid of very high-paid players in the past, as most clubs do, to create that space. They got those 3 days extra, and Olmo seemed very calm when the original deadline passed, because he's like, I trust in the club, I want to be here. Now, the club, if they weren't, should have been in a massive panic at that point, because, of course, if he's no longer registered, he can walk away from his contract for free. So they would have done this, well, only 48 million because they wouldn't have done the bonuses, but a lot of money, an amount of money that they can't afford. And they would have owed him for the rest of the contract.
Only 48 million.
Exactly.
Only.
The bargain.
Yeah.
The bargain. And they would have owed him for the rest of his contract. And he could have gone and signed for anyone else for nothing. Now, they are lucky because, as in the past, they've relied on the goodwill of players, and they had the goodwill of Dani Olmo, who said, look, okay, I could go and sign for someone else and keep the money, but I'm not going to. I made all the efforts to come back to Barcelona because I want to succeed here, because I want to be here. So he was patient with that. Now, when the second deadline passes and Dani Olmo and Pau Victor still can't play, then there's a panic because it looks definitive. Because not only can he not play in La Liga at that point, he can't play in the Copa del Rey, he can't play in the Champions League, he can't play for the Spain national team. So that would leave him not playing for anyone until the summer. Now, obviously, Barcelona have appealed through every way possible, screamed restraint of trade, etc., etc. They've gone to the Higher Sports Council and the CSD, and they've got a sort of stay of execution the moment, while they get to the end of the case, while the appeal reaches a final conclusion. Dani Olmo and Pau Victor are going to be allowed to play in the Supercopa final, whoever that's against, whether it's against Real Mallorca or Real Madrid, on Sunday, having beaten Athletic in the semi. And the most extraordinary scene, Nicky, that in the second half of the game against Athletic, all our attention is really drawn from the pitch, and Joan Laporta, the president of Barcelona, is celebrating wildly as he hears about the provisional registration of Dani Olmo. I mean, you couldn't make it up.
It's only 48 million. I'd celebrate and all.
Well, but personally, I was disappointed because it seems like in the way these courts operate, there's just always someone else to appeal to. And I was wondering how many more stages it would get to before I'd get a call, seeing if I was willing to give them special dispensation. It does feel like that, doesn't it? It feels like it's just, okay, well, that appeal didn't work. We'll just keep going until we just find one person anywhere who says, okay, and then it's all right.
Well, Iñaki Williams was asked about it after the game, of course, the athletic player. And he said it feels like there's one rule for them and there's one rule for the rest of us. Now, in a way, he's sort of got a vested interest in that, not just because Barcelona are a potential competitor in La Liga, although you wouldn't expect Athletic to quite be going for the title. But, of course, his brother, Nico, was not that far away from going to Barcelona in the summer. Why didn't he go? Because he thought something like this might happen.
Yeah, well, I think this is a really interesting part of it. I think, actually, like, at what stage do the players bear some responsibility? And I'm like always on the side of player over club in these situations, because like if it comes to that dynamic between owners and employees, I tend to think, well, all right, I know they're well paid, but it's still a job, and it's easy to get messed around, and you don't want anyone to have their trade restrained, which is effectively what could happen if you end up in a situation where you can't play football because your club's messed up things. But yeah, you do think your agent certainly needs to have walked you into this situation with eyes open about what could happen, because this was not an unforeseeable series of events, was it? It was, as you said, all resting on an injury, which players get better from injuries. And like, what's your plan? And this whole thing with Barcelona have sold now some VIP packages for the Camp Nou when it eventually reopens, and they've made like 150 million, but it came in too late for them to meet the deadline, which is why it then still wasn't okay to free these things up.
But anyone who has any stake in Barcelona as a fan should be frightened by the fact that they're selling the future like this.
But this has been like the whole Laporta era again, hasn't it?
Yeah.
To bring it back to Laporta, I think the conversation you wanted to have, like, everything is, if I can put, it was all levers, wasn't it? Pull this lever, then that frees up this incredibly short-term solution and creates even bigger problems down the line. And every time what's happened is Laporta has grabbed that lever as quickly as he can.
And of course, he won't be president by then, by the time it comes to sort it out.
Although, whilst it's still a cock-up, this quote from Rafinha is quite telling. He's still the club captain, isn't he, Rafinha? He says, if I was in another club, seeing the situation that they're going through, I would probably wonder if coming here is the best option, which kind of echoes what you were saying about Nico Williams' brother.
Yeah.
But it adds something else to it, because he's actually a player there now.
He's in it.
Yeah,
he's one of the figureheads.
Exactly.
I mean, that is the ultimate vote of no confidence on Joan Laporta. And, David Cartledge has been on here and said what he's said in the bluntest possible terms about Joan Laporta, and nothing that's happened since has proved him wrong. I think this feels like a different stage, though. You're right, Dotton, for Rafinha, who is very intelligent and very down to earth, to come out and say this. He also recognised his own responsibility in it, going back to what you were talking about, Nicky. Elsewhere in that press conference, he said, well, look, I knew what could happen, but I just really wanted to play for this club, and I came in with my eyes open.
That's the one thing that Barcelona's got going for it, that it's still got prestige.
Yes.
Amongst players around the world for, maybe past histories, but nevertheless, despite all of this.
And I think the lifestyle factors into it as well, all of that sort of stuff. They're still an attractive proposition, of course they are. But I think for one of the figureheads of the club to say that, I can understand why people would think twice about it. That's really damning. And reputation stick. I think this will be really hard for Barcelona going forward. If you're talking about recruiting the absolute elite of the game. And, they've been sniffing around Erling Haaland, for example, this season. If you were him, why would you consider it?
No way.
Why would you put yourself in that situation when you're one of the biggest brands as a footballer? You just wouldn't, would you? And I think this is the thing. Like, we talked about the 2 deadlines. Once the 31st goes, they think, oh, yeah, we've had this before. But once the 3rd goes, the 3rd of January goes, and they think, okay, there's a real possibility that Dani Olmo and Pau Victor could not be able to play for us for the entire rest of the season and could walk away. Like, the players are sitting there and thinking, this is real now. And Laporta comes in on that Saturday, day after, and gives them a sort of talk through and goes, don't worry, fellas, it's going to be fine. And the players don't buy it. And that is a big departure because now he's under enormous pressure. Now you have groups of supporters getting together and plotting votes of no confidence and talking about the reputational damage that he's put on the club through that. I think this is hard for Laporta to get through the medium term.
Is the cock-up completely down to Laporta?
I think, first of all, just maybe need to stress in here as well, it's not really resolved. This is kicking the can down the road again. But as I understand it, they basically this will be resolved broadly. It's likely to be within 3 months. So basically, what this celebration is right now is they can play in the Supercopa. They can play against Real Madrid. It's kind of the same thing as in the last segment. It's all about playing the big game against your rival. But actually, Dani Olmo could be back out again in February. He could be back on the sidelines, not able to play. The levers are so short term. Everything is just grabbing at what you can do today. On Laporta, I feel like this is maybe a recurring conversation we've had with Barcelona and the model. But this is the nature of, if you are run in a way that has these elections, you're going to have people making promises because they want to get elected, and then they're going to try to
like politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, when he got elected on we're going to keep, for the second time, and we're going to keep Leo Messi at this club. One of the first things he presided over was them going, actually, we haven't got the money to keep you, and leaving the greatest player in their history just crying behind a press conference desk.
That was shocking.
I mean, you're right. It was a genuinely shocking image, and it remains a genuinely shocking image. And when we go into the future, and there are loads of different documentaries and compendiums of Messi's career, I wonder how that will sit in it.
I think that's one of the images for sure, because the biggest chapter of his career will always be Barcelona.
Yes,
the end of it and the way it happened is always a part of that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, it's got Netflix written all over it, isn't it? Netflix 10-parter written all over it. But I guess that's the challenge. When you were talking about how Laporta is just dealing with today and tomorrow morning, that is something that Barcelona are going to have to mop up somewhere down the line. They're going to have to
just keep finding new levers forever. For every day, wake up and put another lever.
I'm not even talking about the levers. I'm talking about Messi, actually, because as the greatest player in their history, at some point, some president of the club is going to
bring him back.
Well, they have to make it right with him.
Yeah. They do.
In whatever way, they have to make it right with him, because what he means to them and what he means to their world reputation, he turned them, or he was a major part, maybe the major part of what turned Barcelona from a club that represented Catalonia and represented a challenge to Real Madrid to maybe the global super club. I mean, he changed everything. And they can't just leave it like this forever. Of all the unpaid bills, of all the debts put off to tomorrow, I think this is one of the biggest in terms of reputation, which is kind of what we're talking about now, isn't it?